Welcome, everyone. We're right at the top of the hour here. On behalf of the staff of the Center for the Integration of IDEA Data, or CID, we're really glad that you've joined us today to hear from our experts and from the state of Iowa on what it takes to start an implementation of Generate. The intended audience of today's webinar is states or state education agencies and organizations that are responsible for EDFacts reporting, but do not necessarily have Generate installed or are leveraging Generate currently in their organization. Now, if you are and you're here to listen and see what else you can learn, you're welcome to stay. So, quick few housekeeping items for today. Again, welcome. Today's webinar, we're going to ask that you enter your questions into the chat. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to enter them at any time into the chat. We will either address those in the chat if appropriate, or we'll also have a few moments, hopefully, at the end of hearing from our state presenter today to have a little question and answer specifically for her. So we'll curate some of those questions. If there are questions left that we are not answering during the webinar, we will be sure to include those responses back out to you all in another format. Also, as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and it will be saved onto the CID YouTube channel, and you'll receive a notification when that is posted. So if there are other folks in your organization or elsewhere that you'd like to share this with, you'll have that information after. Usually it's about a week or so. To practice using the chat, and just because it is fun, hopefully it is a little more spring-like where you are. It is currently, I think, 38 degrees where I am. A little chilly, doesn't really feel like spring. But in the spirit of spring, if you want to enter into the chat your favorite flower or your favorite springtime bloom, and if you want to enter either of those into the chat, we'll see what folks think about springtime flowers. Maybe you're not thinking about springtime flowers yet at all, and you're just thinking any flower that happens to pop up under the snow you're under. I would understand that as well. So, ooh, I like hyacinths too. That's one I hadn't thought of for a while. Do like hyacinths. Oh, lots of tulips. I know. Tulips are like the quintessential springtime thing, right? Ben, I like Ben. Bleeding hearts. We won't go there, Ben. We won't. We won't read into any of that. Shooting stars on a trail. Ooh, Harlan, I'm gonna have to look that up. Oh my gosh, you all have some. Yeah, Robin. I feel the tulips. They come up and then they get destroyed by the weather. That's a little bit what happens around here. I do love them. I think I have those little crocuses, the little purple flowers that pop up, and same sort of thing. They might bloom, they might not. Depends on how cold it gets. Thanks, you guys. Very fun. Clearly, tulips are winning our competition if we were having a competition, but that's okay. All right, so I'm going to get a little bit to our agenda for today. I will introduce our presenters. We'll talk a little bit about the goals and outcomes for this particular webinar so that kind of have an understanding of where we're going, make sure it's fitting what you're looking for. I'll do a little introduction to Generate. We'll dive a little bit more deeply into some of the technology, because again, thinking about preparing for Generate success. And then we have an opportunity to hear from our featured state, which is Iowa. And I'll introduce our presenter here in a moment. Sarah's going to talk a touch about people and processes and how that ties into implementation, talk about resources. And then at the very end, a very important component, of course, opportunity for us to learn how to make these webinars the most useful to you. We have an opportunity for you to participate in the evaluation. So be thinking of that as we skip into our next piece here, where we're going to talk about our presenters, who I'll introduce today. So I'm Emily Rang. I have been with CIID's intensive technical assistance for about 2.5 years. And I am the CIID intensive technical assistance lead, which basically means I have the opportunity to get to support all of the states that engage with CIID under intensive technical assistance. So if you're implementing Generate with CIID, I have the opportunity to sort of help all of those states, which is really awesome. With me today, also from CIID, we have Sarah Sinani, who is our CIID Knowledge Management Lead. Many of you have probably seen Sarah or know Sarah both from the first iteration of the CIID grant, as well as potentially in TA work and other work that she's done. She's a former Part B data manager, and we appreciate her being here today with her expertise. And also today on the technical side, we have Elizabeth Brunette. You may hear me refer to her as Liz, so forgive me. They are one and the same. She's our technical assistance provider and under CIID, and also kind of our technology liaison, if you will. She's the manager of a lot of the technology to the developers, and so she has a lot of insight and expertise. She's been doing state implementation work for many years, and we appreciate her expertise today. So along with those of us from CIID, we also have the opportunity to hear from Emily Cataldi, who is with the Iowa Department of Education, and she is the SLDS project manager there. We're really excited to have her here today to talk a little bit about Iowa's experience early on implementing Generate and kind of their context, as well as some challenges and some successes that they've had. So welcome, Emily, and welcome to all of our presenters, as well as welcome to everyone who is attending today. All right, quick couple of goals. Again, be thinking about this as you think about what you might want to encourage us to change in the future when you get to our evaluation. But our goals for today are to help state education agency staff who either are thinking about or will be implementing Generate, understand kind of the high level scope of the work and some initial conditions and resources that can help make your implementation successful. And then another goal is just hopefully you will find this webinar exciting and engaging. If this is your first sort of dive into Generate, I hope you are prepared, and I hope that we meet your expectations. A couple of outcomes that we are striving for today. We want you all to understand the state perspective. So again, one state example perspective, but we think one that you're going to find a lot of value in on how their data system and processes sort of looked before Generate, as well as they're implementing some things maybe that they've identified. We want you to be able to recognize some resources and maybe some process pieces that might be required in order to implement Generate. And along those same lines, some of those initial conditions, right? So what are the things you might want to prepare for in order to be ready to implement Generate if you were to take that next step? Go. Slide is a little slow. Okay, so we don't have an opportunity, unfortunately, today to hear from all of the states that are currently implementing Generate, or all of the state education agencies, right? However, I did want to provide some context and some quotes from states who have been implementing with us maybe for a long time, or are still sort of maybe closer to where you'll hear Iowa is a little bit earlier in the process. But some of these success things and actual words and phrases and things we've heard from states about Generate. So a lot of if you see on our screen here, we've got yellow highlights for the states that we've engaged with in CIID technical assistance. And I think probably my favorite quote is, "Creating these file specs are so easy and fun. I love it." That's what we should strive for, right? The idea is that creating your EDFacts file specification files should be easy and should be fun. I think some of the fun happens because it's so easy. Not to say that there isn't a whole bunch of preparation and other components, which we'll hear about, that needs to happen in order to get there, but states are getting there, right? We had some folks who referenced our toolkit and how amazing the toolkit is. That's a resource we're going to talk more about here in a moment. Generate implementation led to a better understanding of the validation process, so a data validation process, as well as some additional needs that a state, recognized they wanted to do around standardization across their state. Improving knowledge and collaboration within a particular department, your special ed department, and just a reference to how extremely beneficial it's been. I would say it is not just the implementation, it's also the process, right? So don't lose sight of the effort that you all put in or that states put in. It is effort, but states and territories and organizations involved with Generate are finding the benefits, right? So hopefully that gives you some context to motivate yourselves to continue to think about why you might want to take that leap and that next step into implementing Generate. So a little bit of what implementing Generate really is, right? We're going to start very high level. Liz will talk a little more detailed, and then you'll get to hear from what Iowa's perspective is, right? So we'll get to hear from Emily Cataldi. Generate in its simplest form is really taking your state data, right? So your state system, whatever system or multiple systems those are, using the Common Education Data Standards. So that's that CEDS gray box in the middle there, using that as your translation into your EDFacts file specifications, as well as other data reporting for SPP APR or other reports you might want to create or leverage from the open source community. It is free. I like to point that out because it is an open source community tool that has been funded under a grant from the Office of Special Education. So hence it is free. It does automate and simplify that reporting, right? So not to say that the translation to go from your state system or systems into CEDS is easy, but once that mapping, once you have that experience, once you've kind of get used to the Common Education Data Standards language, it does automate portions of that, right? You're just moving the data into the CEDS elements. You're controlling and validating and ensuring that that data is getting into CEDS correctly. And then you can just have folks who are subject matter experts and maybe not data experts go in and do the simple and easy, it's so fun kind of activity where they get to push the button to create the reports, right? And if you've ever worked with EDFacts file specifications before, I'll just say that some of those file specifications are not always the easiest to format. And so having that formatting built into a tool that you aren't responsible for maintaining can be really helpful, right? And can make it a little bit more fun. There's also this idea, right? If you are translating your state data into a common education data standard, CEDS, which is stakeholder driven, you're going to improve consistency. You're able to compare the way that your state system translates into CEDS to how other states do that. And maybe there are things you might learn about your own data in doing that process. There might be something that you've done for a long time in that translation from your state system to your EDFacts reporting that you uncover while you're doing that translation to CEDS. So it's an opportunity to dive deeply into those, into that transformation and be able to compare and create consistency. Also, again, the idea of supporting timely and efficient reporting because you have something that should provide efficiencies in terms of the actual process. So those are all kind of key elements to Generate. Trying to think if there's anything else. So I've touched at sort of a high level here on the basic concept of how data moves from your state system and what Generate kind of does. And now we're going to hear from Elizabeth Brunette about some more of the deep technology pieces that you might be wondering about as you're looking at this high level slide. So I'll turn it over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Emily. Okay, so I am going to discuss briefly about some of the initial requirements of setting up Generate. So some of the things that you kind of have to think about before kicking things off or while kicking things off. So the first one that we have documented is resources for mapping and business logic. So This is really making sure that you're planning and utilizing your subject matter experts for that transformation or translation that Emily was just talking about from your source info into the CEDS standard. So here you'll have to consider pulling people in who can speak to where the data is coming from, if it's being aggregated, how it's being collected, all of those different pieces that you have to document and think about while you're building out the mappings and business logic prior to the ETL that will load and create the file specifications at Generate. The second piece is really thinking about your environment and how you're going to set it up. So, whether it's going to be on prem or in the cloud. Additionally, something that we recommend is also having at least two environments. So, the first one being a stage or test environment where you can, load data into it, kind of play around, make sure that it's matching correctly, making sure that it's looking right. And then having a production environment, which you would then create the actual files from. Usually what we see, pending on your organization, is that your IT department will have to be included in this or a database administrator to kind of help that process and set up those environments, help set up access or anything like that. So again, just considering probably needing resources or subject matter experts, either your IT team or a database administrator. And then additionally, like I said, there's options for on-prem or cloud environment. Currently, we have, I think we have one state using AWS and then a few different ones using Azure. So that's kind of like a lift and shift type situation, or you can also use web apps such as Azure Web Apps or AWS Elastic Beanstalk. That there's limitations to both of those, and if you have additional, questions or comments, you can always throw them in the chat. We can help try and answer them. So Gitbook is a new platform that we're really excited about. We have, thanks Travis. Travis just threw the link in there. It's public. You should all be able to access it. But it is a new platform that we are using for maintaining and publishing technical documentation. So previously we had done some our website kind of stored. It was just a little clunky, like PDFs that were hard to maintain or edit or anything like that. So we're really excited about this. This is kind of more interactive. It's a little bit easier to utilize. One feature that I really love is you can see there on the screenshot, there's a table of contents that you can click and kind of drill down. And it's, like I said, it's really user friendly. It's really easy to use. Another really cool feature that is new and we're excited about is that search bar. That's not something that we had previously. So if there's something specific content that you're looking for, you can search and see if it's in there. But this is so we're trying to migrate all of our existing documentation to this platform. Um, like I said, it's new, it's constantly evolving. So if you get into it and you have any feedback, or there's something that you like, there's something that you don't like, there's something that you would like to see, we would love to hear it. It's something that we constantly are working into our work. It's a ticket that we have in our biweekly sprints. So again, it's something that's constantly evolving, and we would love to hear your feedback on it. I am going to turn things over to Emily Cataldi with Iowa, and she's going to speak to her Generate implementation.
Okay, thanks, Liz. I want to talk to start this by talking about what motivated us in the state of Iowa to get started with Generate. So we had an EDFacts coordinator that had been with the department for many years. She knew that she would be retiring soon. I'm actually sitting in her cube right now, and she left on the whiteboard. It says SIDS to Generate. That was the only thing that she left, sort of for me as I kind of took over the reins. At any rate, so she, that's been sitting on the whiteboard for a while now, and she's been, encouraging us to go this route and really wanted the state. She saw a lot of benefit in Generate for the work that she'd been doing for so long, and anticipating that the loss of institutional knowledge that would occur when she retired. Um, in addition, we did have uh, an SLDS grant that we applied for the fiscal year SLDS 19 SLDS grant. And we included the implementation of Generate because we recognized that there would be some tremendous value in terms of data quality, but also some efficiency gains as well if we were to move towards implementing Generate. And so we saw some modernization opportunity in the use of Generate within that grant. So we applied for and then received the grant. And so the combination of those two things really motivated us to go ahead and pursue the implementation of Generate. So next we'll talk about the context. So when it was time, we'd received the grant, when it was time for us to go ahead and start talking about how we'll move forward and when we'll move forward with implementing Generate, we had the EDFacts coordinator that I mentioned, Marlene, decided she was ready to go. So she retired early on in the implementation stage and was not able to sort of see it through to its completion, but luckily was able to be around during some of the initial stages of implementation. We also, as we were preparing for this, our Part B data manager was on leave. So we had some institutional knowledge challenges to overcome. We also did not have an immediate successor to our EDFacts coordinator. We had sort of an interim. So there was a little bit of a gap in terms of the full-time that full-time position. We also had, we'll call it an emerging K-12 data governance program. It was really fairly, very much in its infancy at the time. So we did not have a robust, complete data governance program that we were operating within our K-12 area. We had lots of data security and lots of good people working hard to make sure that we were we were being good stewards of the data, but as far as a complete program, we couldn't necessarily check that box at the time that we were working to implement Generate. We also were in the middle of a massive effort within our IT department to migrate much of our work to the cloud. And our IDEA friends were working on a brand new data management system called Achieve that would be what would produce ultimately our IDEA data. So all of those things that I mentioned were really good reasons to not pursue implementing Generate at the time that we did. But we had CIID technical assistance. We recognized that opportunity. We had the opportunity to sort of jump on that um, resource and felt like we needed to just sort of proceed and really needed to sort of move the effort forward despite the fact that maybe the timing was not ideal. So that's where we were as far as when we were kind of really ready to get started. So then once we were ready to go forward, we there was a there were a number of tools that we used when we were really sort of ready to get down to brass tacks. And like I said, our EDFacts coordinator, who was about to retire, was with us for the first portion of this, and we worked through some documents that are available on CID's website. I think Emily, maybe we'll talk about that later. Um, and so there's a scope document, there's some use case, they're working documents, right? They inspired, spurred conversation amongst those of us who needed to have the information in order to think through what do we want, how do we want to use this, who needs to be involved, where do things stand for us right now. So we joined this work group called Jumpstart Generate that Sid was putting on and dove into the work a little bit. Then the next step really was sort of once we had those as framing documents and framing ideas, the next step really was these great conversations. We had to find out who the various stakeholders were that were contributing data. And that became a bit, frankly, of of an archaeological dig in some situations. We did not always have the institutional knowledge that we needed once our EdFacts coordinator had retired. So we had to go back through and sort of meticulously determine where is the source of truth, who owns this, who do we need to talk to, what sort of stage in the data collection work do we grab this, and from where, and so on and so forth. So that really spurred some great conversations and frankly uncovered some situations where we were not, being as consistent or efficient as we could have been. So once we got that nailed down, then and obviously I'm giving you very broad strokes here, but once we got that nailed down, we then mapped to the CEDS. And from there, then we created with SID's help. We've had SID's help, I should mention, all the way through, invaluable help, creating ETL checklists and um, and and then matching data. So we all while this was happening, we were doing lots of other things. Like Achieve was being stood up and tested, and we were figuring out and are still in the midst of figuring out how Achieve will work for us. And how we will sort of incorporate those data into the EdFacts reporting process that we're setting up through Generate. A massive data governance effort within K-12, and within the DE broadly actually, has come underway. We have done some cloud migration with IT, and are continuing to figure out how this will all look moving forward. So there was a lot of moving target happening, and I think that's sort of um, a key message maybe, or lesson, which is that you'll probably never be ready. Things will never be entirely set in stone so that you can just implement it without anything else moving on you. So that was a helpful lesson for us too. I think that it was okay for us to move forward even though not everything was necessarily in place. And I think I'll touch on that next here. Oh, so first I'll talk about where we are right now. So Generate is almost operational. So there's the April 26th deadline for the directory files, and we're going to be able to submit those directory files via Generate, which is really, really exciting. We're all very excited that we're going to be able to meet that deadline. So we have additional files that we will continue to work towards. So that's just our first. And so we've got ETL checklists and lots of additional work, that mapping work that has been done, and some more that we need to do, and more conversations that we need to have, and so on and so forth. But this is a really huge first milestone and first step towards work as we work towards more and more reports that we're able to submit, and files that we're able to submit via Generate. So I've I've touched on many of these already, but I think they're sort of important to highlight maybe as a group. That there have been some, roadblocks and challenges along the way, but nothing has derailed us. This is a redemption story, to be overly dramatic about it. So we've had lots of these modernization efforts that are underway all at the same time, IT and data governance and so on and so forth. And we've been able to bring everybody together, adjust our timelines, adjust our resources. Sid has been with us all along the way to help figure out how can we pivot to meet this need even though we're blocked on this in this other area. um, this The identifying data owners to sort of participate, that has been that was a bit of a surprise challenge, in that um, there's a lot of data that lives a lot of places. And if we aren't careful and judicious about ensuring that we're having all the right conversations, it's a little too easy, especially as things evolve, but communication doesn't follow that evolution. It's a little bit too easy to miss a change that has occurred. And so having this process, these conversations, bringing all of this to light, has been really, really valuable for our state in understanding specifically where the data comes from, who's involved, who needs to be a part of these various conversations, so that we and then mapping out a process moving forward. And that brings me to the sustainability piece. um, how will we keep all of this up to date? We're still very much in the middle of this. Like I said, we're just now getting ready to submit our first set of files. So who's responsible, and what is the what is the timing of any potential data changes? Is this an annual check-in process? Is this a quarterly? Who are we checking in with? How do we make sure that we're not checking in with the wrong person? How do we make sure that file data elements haven't changed in a way that would affect things that we need time to know about before the last minute? So we have a lot of those conversations that are coming up. And again, there are lots of tools available from CID, but also just it speaks to process a little bit, and it has been valuable for us beyond just the EDFacts generate conversation. It's been valuable to us as a department to think about what is the source of truth, not just for EDFacts reporting, but for the department. And source of truth can the truth varies, right? Depending on what the use case is. And you know, there but just being able to bring it to light and document it and make sure that everybody understands it, as opposed to somebody's doing something over here with spreadsheets. That has a manual process with spreadsheets. This has been a really helpful conversation in general in really thinking hard about modernization and interoperability and all of these types of things moving forward. So now this is the sales portion of my talk, and if I haven't sold CID and Generate highly enough yet, here we go. So this has been really great. We have the amount of manual work that had gone into our EDFacts reporting in the past was quite eye-opening for me as a person who joined the department just after after we received the FY19 grant. It was really quite surprising. And so we have certainly been able to already see some efficiencies, and there will be many more efficiencies down the road that we will continue to recognize as we start to be able to integrate systems and think about building this out so that we can do more and more EDFacts reporting by using Generate. I just mentioned that it helps really manage the process of knowing who to go to and what questions to ask, and having all this information collected all at once will help us build out a plan to ensure that this is all sustainable. We can keep everything current and up to date, and so on. And then the data quality aspect of this is very much built into Generate. And that was something that the prior EdFX coordinator was so thrilled about, was the fact that we would be able to and can run quality checks before that are built in, that are, easily, I should say, in a streamlined and consistent way that doesn't require us, considering what types of checks should we be doing? It's already right there. We can run those data quality checks and review data before it goes anywhere, so that we make sure we're sending the very best quality data, resolving any sort of issues internally with the folks that on the data before it goes anywhere else, without having to wait for feedback, which can sometimes be months out. And then you have to recreate the whole process to figure out what you did and how you got that number in the first place to try to figure that out. So lots and lots of benefits from this work already, and we're still fairly early on. So I think I've probably made this case rather forcefully already, but I think it's really important to note that there are so many things that you need to be able to make this work. Technical specifications, you need a lot of buy-in. Really, that's really key, to have a lot of buy-in from leadership and buy-in from the folks who will, IT and so on and so forth. But you also don't have to have everything all at once. You can, to some extent, to a great extent, in our experience. What is that? Build the plane while you're flying it. I mean, it's there's so many different components, and it's such uh, a wide variety of things that you need to work on, that you can parcel it out here and there. And we got our generated environment up and running earlier this week. Um, so, even though we're this close, we've been working on this for a long time. This is when we were able to get the environment finally, up and running, and it worked. It's all going to work out. So, I think that's a key lesson that if we just don't wait too long, it's worth pursuing, even if you can't, even if your timeline is a little bit longer than you might like. And I know beating this drum, but the CID technical support was really and tools that are available have been really, really key to our success. So I think with that, I'm turning over to Sarah. Is that right?
I was going to pause for just a moment. We do have a little bit of time here for a couple questions. If there are any questions folks want to enter in the chat, sorry, Sarah, before we kick it off to you. But Emily, a couple of things I was just sort of noting in the chat as you were talking is, you talked a little bit about how it was surprising to you the number of data owners that like you had to kind of identify, right? And like really get to that source of truth, and that surprised you. I just wanted to recognize that one of the things that I think has made Iowa really successful in that area is your leadership. So having a strong leader who can help identify somebody who can track those needs and then document them and has the right authority to have conversations with data owners to become engaged, I think is really critical, and wasn't necessarily mentioned in your presentation, but it's just something that I know about the way that Iowa has done this work. So and then the other thing is like I'm hopeful that the first file that you guys get done here with directory, like it really feels to me like that is building the momentum for your work and will kind of hopefully carry some of, that's a fun success to celebrate that very first file. So really excited to hear how that goes, and if that file submission, continues to help maybe propel your efforts forward. So just something else to note while we give folks a moment here. If you have, like I say, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter those in the chat for Emily. We'll maybe hang here for another moment before we transition to Sarah. Oh, we have this great question. It's kind of a data governance question from Drew in Vermont. Thank you, Drew. He's wondering if you have any tips for getting like that official sign off from data stewards. So it sounds like Vermont is using the ETL checklists to really try to document and kind of gain an understanding, if you will, or just even like keep track of who all their subject matter experts are. Do you have any tips or maybe a particular experience that worked for you for getting those data stewards to sort of sign off, or even maybe data owners? Like,
So we really involved our data stewards, data owners very heavily early on in the process while we were working on the data source to CEDS
mapping.
mapping. And then again, as we were working on the CEDS to generate sort of developing the checklist. Once we got to that point, though, we didn't re-engage those data stewards, but we did. I mean, we had what I really did was I identified who needed to be in the meeting, who the key stakeholders were, the key data owners for each portion, and then we set up meetings. We just kind of plowed through it. I mean, it was a little bit of a tedious experience, frankly. We tried to share resources up front, so in anticipation of each meeting, we would share the portion of the spreadsheet is what it was that we were going to be working through so that folks had time to they could come in cold and react, or they could think through and ahead of time if they wanted to be able to give something a little bit more thought. We also would come back to items, flag. Liz was great about sort of helping us flag items that we weren't sure about, we needed a little bit more information and come back to in a later session. But we really did sort of force a meeting. It was it it was We had some situations early on where we didn't have everybody in the room at the time, and we ended up with some information that maybe wasn't quite right or wasn't as nuanced as we needed. So I just, after that, it was sort of like, well, we're really going to have a meeting time where everybody commits to attending, and we're just going to have to, sort of painfully work through it. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but forced meetings, maybe bring cookies. I don't, that really is. They're,
I think that's a
run by
valid
line.
tactic. I'll say that's a valid tactic. Very good. Yeah, I will say I think that is, like I say, sort of saying like this is the expectation for the meeting, right? We're going to go through this. We're going to sign off on it. You can participate ahead of time by looking at it and bringing feedback, or you can come and react. But that's what we're doing this meeting, and that's what the outcome is going to be, right? I am gonna. I know there's a follow-up question, and maybe Drew, it might be great. We can see if we'll message back with Emily. We can give you some more information about the specific steps they took, whether they use CEDS Align. There was a little bit of both early on, but I do want to give Sarah enough time here to talk a little bit about people and processes. But we'll see if we can get some more information from Emily to share with everybody. But thank you very much. So, Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily and Emily. I think that what Iowa shared really ties into this section in a way where you heard about her process, you heard about Iowa's process, and everyone involved. And I'm going to detail how we came to why those particular people and processes are important. So way back at the beginning of CIID, we were talking about data integration, and in round one of CIID, we really honed in on breaking down silos and integrating IDEA data into the greater data system. And we focused on a triad. We felt like the triad of people, processes, and systems was really key and vital to integrating data. And it really carried over as we started building Generate and implementing Generate. Liz talked about the process when she talked about what was needed to install Generate and get Generate up and running. And I'm going to touch a little bit on people and processes, but you heard perfect examples of people and processes when Emily talked about Iowa's structure and Iowa's experience with Generate. So the people is really the who of Generate. Your stakeholders, your leadership, and leadership can be anyone from your core group of Generate within the Generate team, who is your project manager, who is going to be involved in the meetings, but it can go up to the department leadership. Who are your champions? Who are the ones that you need to get on board? Who are your challengers? The people is all the people involved. Anyone who touches the data, anyone who may be a champion or a challenger for you, making sure that you have note of who is going to be involved in this project, this process, so that you can tap into those resources, those people resources as needed. The process goes right along with that. This is the how of Generate. It's your meetings, it's documentation, it's timelines for the project, timelines or calendars for getting data in, what items maybe, or what calendar issues may be bumping up against Generate deadlines or EdPass deadlines. And right now, I know you're all updating your calendars, your process calendars from the EDFacts to EdPass, because those dates have changed. And so making sure that those pieces are documented. So really the process is about documentation. So when you marry people, processes, and systems together, you've got this really great look at documenting the Generate process so that it can be carried forward longitudinally, whether you have the same people in the project or not. So as turnover happens, and we know it does, this process, this Generate project process, is well documented with people, processes, and the system itself. So in talking about the process, as Emily Cataldi noted, we have tons of resources. And one of those resources is our toolkit. we've done webinars in the past about exactly what the toolkit is and each of those steps. So I'm not going to go into that today because it's a lot of information. I just want to note that the toolkit lines out if we had a perfect world process where we would start with defining your goals and then go to establishing the plan and then mapping your data, running the ETL process, and then, to wrap up whatever file you're working on, documenting the process, making sure you have appropriate documentation, and running an after action review so you can document what went well, what do we still need to adjust and modify so that it goes better in the future. So there's tons of steps within there to help you achieve those goals. As Emily pointed out, you don't have to have your ducks in a row because we don't live in a perfect world and our states don't operate in perfect union with what we identified as this circular process. So within the toolkit, we have embedded tools. It's a toolkit, right? So we've embedded these tools that we feel like will help you along the way. So even if you don't have a data governance system set up, you can still hop in and with whoever is on your Generate team, use the use case and the scope documents to identify your goals, identify your why, or run through the project planner and identify roles and responsibilities for those who are going to be included, create a communication plan for the entire process. That's one of those things that's really important so that as you go through and you're implementing Generate, you are creating these files, you know who needs to be communicated with, you know how they like to be communicated with, and you know kind of a timeline that you're operating. This is also a good, within that tool, the project planner, we have the calendar and a resource to build out a project plan. So the calendar, you can identify vital dates for your state, when updates are being made to the system, when files are due, when collections are due from your districts and schools. So you can plug all those pieces in without going through and formally establishing a project plan if you're just not there. Within the mapping and install, we have the ETL checklist. That's one of those that you're really going to want to focus on because that's the recipe for getting your data into Generate and doing the migration. The Generate user guides and implementation guides, that'll be really helpful for your developers and the people that actually do the data processing and data migration. And then at the end, after you've done your submissions, we have an after action review guide. So if you don't really know what questions to ask as you finish up one collection, we've got a guide there for you that help walk you through looking at the process itself, as well as we have the data submission organizer, and this will just help formalize some of those documentation pieces so that you can capture the system itself and have some written documentation that you can hand off as turnover happens, or as you change positions, or as the project grows. You have that documented so that you can go through again and replicate what you did well and change what needs to be changed as time goes on. So all of this is included in resources that we have on the website. So if you go to the CIID website, the toolkit is there for you to use, for you to look through, as well as just a plethora of other resources and other tools to help you along the Generate roadmap process project. I don't like to use the word project because it doesn't end, right? You get through one, and that's why this is cyclical. You get through one report and then you start over again with the next report and you run through the same process each time. So I know process is used a ton when we talk about this, but it's really a Generate process rather than a project. Are there any questions about resources that we have available? If you go to the website, you can find I think a recording of a webinar that we've done on the toolkit. If you want a more in-depth look at the toolkit itself and the steps within the toolkit, it's a really great guide. As you're setting up, if you're ready to start setting up the Generate project itself, that's a really great guide to go and look at what all we have within the toolkit and a deeper dive into some of these resources and documents.
So I did just mention thank you, Sarah. We do have a few moments here. If there are any additional questions you might have for Sarah or regarding the toolkit or the resources or that lovely people process systems diagram, definitely have a moment before we move to our next item. Give folks a moment if they want to put anything in the chat. I did kind of call out in the chat as well. You mentioned the roles and responsibilities tab within the project planner as kind of, it's in that established project plan step, whether you do that in that order or not. But based on some of the conversation earlier was, around how do you, that identifying the owner, if you will, of each source system. One of the tools you could use to document that would be that roles and responsibilities tab within the project planner.
And I would say along with that, Emily, you can identify those subject matter experts, but then when you use the calendar, you can also plug in when you need validation from those subject matter experts back to you to say, yeah, this data is correct, or no, we're not including the correct kids. Let's take a look at our ETL again. So those are good places to identify when you need to have formal yeses and nos from your subject matter experts, as well as identifying the roles and names of who your subject matter experts are. Although I know names can change, but at least you identified that role. So as somebody new steps into those roles, you can switch out the names.
Absolutely. And somebody asked about the slides. Yes, they'll be posted on the CIID website, and that'll be part of the link that gets sent out. So glad you're finding the PowerPoint useful. That's excellent. I think with that, we're going to transition to our next item here.
Yep. Like we said at the beginning, this evaluation piece. So Travis is going to drop the evaluation link. I think we also have, we also have the QR code here. These evaluations are really vital to help us create trainings and information sessions that are that work for you, that are valuable for your time. So we would appreciate all your feedback within the evaluation. I also did want to mention that, we talked about Emily Cataldi was the SLDS expert in Iowa. SLDS is one of our partners. So as we go through this process, we keep SLDS liaisons involved and informed in the project. So that's one of the resources that you can tap into to get started, to help you with some data governance items or issues that you have, as well as any of the resources on the CIID website and contacting CIID for any of your questions. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that those were available, and those are our valuable partners as we work through and work with states.
Absolutely. And you'll see some reference to some of their documentation specifically within the toolkit because they do have some expertise in those areas as well. So thank you, Sarah, for helping remind folks how important evaluation is. I would second that. We sort of kicked this off with we do try to respond and listen to all of the feedback you all give us. So appreciate you taking the time. I do also, I'm going to leave this up for just another second. And then we're going to move on to some contact information for all of us today. So if you are interested in reaching out to any of us directly related to either something you heard today or a particular piece of expertise you're hoping to connect with, feel free to reach out to us directly. As I said, Dan Mello, who could not be here today, but is the co-lead for technical assistance with me here on CIID and helps set up all of these webinars to make them useful. If you have specific webinar feedback or webinar requests, Dan would be the man for that. Definitely appreciate you all joining us today, and hope you have learned about Generate and the implementation steps it takes. very much appreciate Emily Cataldi for taking the time today to share with us about Iowa's experience and her leadership in that area. And Emily, we're looking forward to hearing more from Iowa as you guys get your first files submitted, and maybe we can do an update at some point if states who participated today might be interested. So thank you all so very much. We're going to hang around here for another few moments. If folks have a couple questions we may be able to address, we do have a few moments before the end of the day. So yes, and thank you, Emily. Yeah, we can certainly forward any questions you might have specifically for Emily to her as well, and to in the Iowa context. Thank you all so much.